On Mother's Day, my daughter gave her mother-in-law a $20,000 diamond ring and a luxury cruise through the Mediterranean. She gave me a $5 plastic flower and a note that said, "Thanks for everything, Mom." The next morning she called me 28 times. My name is Linda Prescott. I'm 67 years old. I built a successful consulting firm from the ground up, supported my family through every crisis, and gave more of myself than I ever thought possible. But this story isn't about business. It's about a moment when I realized that the people I loved most had stopped seeing me as a person and started seeing me as a wallet. I used to think I'd experienced every kind of heartbreak life could throw at me. I was wrong. That Sunday began like any other. I woke up alone, made coffee for one, and sat in the silence of the house I used to share with my husband Tom. He passed 3 years ago. The silence used to comfort me. Lately, it just reminded me of everything I'd lost, especially the conversations that would never happen again. Then came the call. My daughter, Julie, said, "Mom, we're having brunch at Rick's mom's house tomorrow. You should come, 1 o'clock sharp." Not, "We'd love to have you." Just a polite obligation wrapped in cool distance. I should have known then. But I still went. Rick's mother, Patricia, lived in an immaculate white brick house in the nicer part of town. Her driveway was already packed when I arrived. I parked down the street and walked up alone. Laughter floated from the backyard, warm, easy, familiar. When I stepped through the gate, I saw them all gathered around a long patio table. Rick at the grill, his sister chatting with neighbors, and Julie sitting beside Patricia like they were lifelong friends. Their heads were close together, laughing at something private. Patricia looked up first. "Linda," she said with a well-rehearsed smile, "so glad you could make it." Julie barely glanced up. "Hi, Mom, you can sit over there." She pointed to a chair at the far end of the table, away from the others. No hug. No warmth. I sat down quietly and watched the conversation swirl around me about people I didn't know, plans I wasn't part of. Then came the gifts. "Oh, Patricia, we have something special for you." Julie stood, her voice filled with excitement I hadn't heard from her in years. Rick joined her, holding a small velvet box and a white envelope. Patricia gasped as she opened the box. A diamond ring sparkled under the sun, elegant and bold. Julie hugged her tightly. "It's not too much for the woman who raised the man I love." Everyone applauded. Patricia wiped away tears. Then Rick turned toward me. "And now for Grandma Linda." Julie walked over with a small, crinkled gift bag. Inside, a plastic flower, the kind you see in bins at the dollar store, and a card. The printed message read, "Happy Mother's Day." Underneath, in Julie's handwriting, "Thanks for everything, Mom." That was it. The table went quiet. Someone coughed. Patricia looked down. Even Rick shifted uncomfortably. "It's lovely," I said. My voice sounded small, unfamiliar. "Thank you, dear." But Julie had already turned away, laughing again with Patricia, animated and glowing. The conversation picked up without me. I sat there for another hour, holding that cheap flower like it weighed 50 pounds. Watching my daughter give love to another woman, like it came easy, while I sat in silence at the edge of her life. I left without a scene. That's never been my style. When I said I was heading out, Julie didn't even look up. "Thanks for coming, Mom. Drive safe." The drive home was a blur. I couldn't stop thinking about that moment. The way her eyes lit up when she handed Patricia that ring, and how dull her face looked when she handed me a plastic flower. When was the last time she'd looked at me like that? I sat in my driveway for nearly an hour, the gift bag still on the passenger seat. I kept staring at it, hoping it might transform into something that made sense. It didn't. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, the memory looping in my head like a movie on repeat. 43 years of motherhood, college tuition, wedding planning, helping her and Rick buy their home. And now, I was worth $5 and a thank you note that felt like it belonged in a corporate email. Somewhere around 3 a.m., I got up and walked into my home office. I opened the filing cabinet, not to prove anything to anyone, but because I needed to remind myself that my love hadn't just been words. It had receipts. The first folder I opened was labeled Julie, College. Inside were printouts of tuition payments, dorm fees, meal plans. Receipts for textbooks, lab equipment, a laptop, even 2 parking tickets she'd gotten freshman year. The total? Just over $47,000. I'd forgotten half of it. Next came the wedding folder. Julie, Rick, June 2012. $58,000. That included the venue, catering, flowers, her dress, a high-end photographer, and a jazz trio she wanted for the cocktail hour. Rick's parents? They brought a case of wine. Then came the house file. When Julie and Rick got married, they wanted to live in an upscale neighborhood they couldn't quite afford. So I co-signed the mortgage. 2 years later, when Rick's landscaping business hit a rough patch, I covered the payments for 6 months, quietly. They never knew. 3 different vehicles over the years each time, I promise. It's just until we get back on our feet, Mom. Those payments were never returned. And then there was the emergency fund. In 2019, Rick's business nearly collapsed after a string of bad investments. Julie called me crying. I wired $85,000 to them that same afternoon. New questions, new paperwork, just love. 6 months later, they bought a boat. By the time I finished adding it all up, I sat back in my chair and stared at the number. Almost $400,000. That didn't even include the bookkeeping work I funneled to Julie, or the above-market rate contracts I handed Rick for my company's commercial landscaping. $400,000. And what did I get? A plastic flower from a dollar bin. It wasn't the money that hurt. I'd been successful. I'd made wise investments. I could afford to be generous. What cut deep was how invisible that generosity had become. Expected, assumed, forgotten. I reached for my phone and scrolled through a year's worth of texts from Julie. Can you pick up the kids from school? Rick needs to borrow the truck. We're short on groceries this week, can you help? Not once did she ask how I was. Not once did she say, I love you, Mom. That night, I sat alone in my office, surrounded by manila folders and forgotten receipts, and realized something I hadn't wanted to admit. Somewhere along the line, I had stopped being a mother to my daughter, and started being her financial institution. A lender. A silent partner. An invisible safety net. And the worst part? I had allowed it. I let every ask go unanswered. I gave without boundaries, hoping love would bloom from obligation. But love doesn't work like that. Love isn't bought. It isn't owed. It's shown. And my daughter hadn't shown me love in years. She'd shown convenience. She'd shown dependence. But not love. I looked around my office awards on the wall, framed articles, proof of a life built from nothing. But none of it filled the hole I felt sitting there with a plastic flower in my lap. That's when something inside me shifted. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just got quiet. In that firm, dangerous way a woman does when she's finally had enough. It was time to stop paying for the illusion of love. It was time to find out who I was without everyone else leaning on me to survive. The next morning, I called my attorney, Margaret Sloan. She'd been with me for over a decade, guiding me through business expansions, contracts, tax restructuring, everything. But that Monday, when I walked into her office overlooking downtown, I wasn't a CEO seeking advice. I was a mother, trying to figure out how to let go. Margaret raised an eyebrow as I sat down. Linda, you look exhausted. What's going on? I looked her in the eye. I want to sell the company. She paused. Prescott Consulting? Are you sure? You built that from the ground up? It's your legacy? That's exactly the problem, I said quietly. My legacy has become everyone else's safety net, and I need to find out who my daughter is when she's no longer living off my effort. Margaret took a slow breath and pulled out a legal pad. We reviewed every link between my company and Julie's household. Rick's landscaping contracts all managed through my commercial properties. Julie's part-time bookkeeping income reliant on my client referrals. The mortgage still in my name. If you sell, Margaret said, they'll lose everything that connects to your company. I know, I said. And I need to see what they do without it. Margaret hesitated. This isn't a gradual shift then? Gradual change gives people time to adjust and to manipulate the situation. If I do this, it has to be clean. Margaret nodded. Then we'll begin the process. Quietly, discreetly. No one will know until the sale is done. That afternoon, I walked out of her office lighter than I'd felt in years. The first step was taken. I was no longer just a provider. I was reclaiming my life. I didn't make a big announcement. There were no dramatic speeches or family sit-downs. I simply started pulling the threads quietly, carefully, one at a time. First, I called Rick's landscaping company. I'm reviewing budgets for the upcoming quarter, I told him. I'll be collecting competitive bids for all my commercial properties. There was a beat of panic in his voice. Wait, Mrs. Prescott, we can lower our rates. We'll match any bid you get. It's not about the rates, I said calmly. It's about options. Next, I contacted the 3 small business clients who used Julie's bookkeeping services. I told them I was restructuring my referral process and that they'd need to find a new provider within 60 days. It was all professional. I never mentioned her name. That evening, Julie called. "Mom, Mrs. Patterson said you're not referring her clients anymore. Did I mess something up?" "Not at all," I said evenly. "I'm just simplifying some of my business operations. But I need that income. That's my work. I'm sure you'll find new clients. You're very capable." There was a pause. "You've been acting strange lately. Is everything okay?" "I'm fine, Julie, just focused on a few business matters." I hung up and sat at the kitchen table, staring at that plastic flower. And for the first time in years, I felt something unexpected. Power. Not the kind that writes checks. The kind that comes from finally saying no. 3 weeks into the process, my phone rang. It was Rick. "Hey, Mrs. Prescott, I heard a rumor at the Chamber of Commerce. Are you selling your business?" My heart thudded, but I kept my voice steady. "People talk, Rick. You know how it is. But if it were true, you'd tell us, right? I mean, it affects our whole setup. If and when I make a major decision, you'll be informed appropriately." That night, Julie showed up at my house. She didn't knock. Just walked right in like she always had. Her hair was pulled back, face tired. She looked more like a college student cramming for finals than the polished woman I'd raised. "Mom," she said, "we need to talk." She sat on the couch without being invited. "Rick's contracts. My bookkeeping clients. The business. What's happening?" I sat across from her, hands folded. "I'm reevaluating my priorities." "Is this about Mother's Day?" Her voice edged with defensiveness. "I'm sorry if you didn't like the gift, but we've been tight on money." I nearly laughed. Tight on money while living in a house I still paid for, driving a car I co-signed, and working jobs I had handed to her. But I didn't say that. "This isn't about a flower, Julie. It's about everything." She stared at me. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I've been subsidizing your entire adult life. And, somewhere along the way, you stopped seeing me as your mother. And started seeing me as your resource. That's not fair. Isn't it? When was the last time you called just to talk, asked how I was doing, or checked in on me after your dad died?" Julie blinked rapidly, caught off guard. I continued. "Patricia got a ring and a cruise because you wanted her to feel appreciated. And me? I got something you grabbed on the way out of the pharmacy." Tears welled up in her eyes. "I love you, Mom." "Do you? Or do you love what I can do for you?" She didn't answer. Right then, my phone buzzed. "Rick." I picked up. "Linda," he said. "We need to talk about the sale. This affects our whole family." "No, Rick. It affects me. It's my business to sell. Come on. Our contracts, our livelihood. Your livelihood has been my responsibility for too long. It's time you both stood on your own feet." I hung up. Julie stared at me like she didn't recognize the woman sitting in front of her. I'd never been more certain of anything. It was over. The next morning, my phone started ringing before sunrise. 6:47 a.m. "Julie." I let it go to voicemail. She called again. And again. By the time I finished my coffee, there had been 12 missed calls. I finally picked up on the 13th. "Mom, please," she said. Her voice was frantic. "We need to talk about this. You can't just destroy our lives over a misunderstanding." "This isn't about a misunderstanding," I replied. "And it's not about revenge. It's about clarity. What do you want from me?" "I want you to see me as a person, Julie. Not a paycheck. Not a lifeline. Not a backup plan." She was silent, then whispered, "If you sell the company, we'll lose everything. The house, Rick's clients, my job." "Yes," I said gently. "And maybe that's exactly what you need." She hung up. 20 minutes later, she called again. Then again. And again. By noon, I stopped counting at 28 missed calls. Every voicemail was a different plasm. Angry, some desperate. "Mom, we can fix this. Rick's having chest pains from stresso. You want him hospitalized? Everyone's going to think you're cruel. Mom, please. I'm sorry, I'll do better." But it was too late for apologies born from fear. She was finally learning what I had known for years. You cannot guilt someone into love. 2 weeks later, the sale went through. Prescott Consulting was no longer mine. I packed up my office in a single afternoon. 30 years of files, memories, late nights, and long weekends boxed and stored. I kept only what mattered: a few photos, my late husband Tom's favorite books, and the baby quilt my mother had sewn when Julie was born. I bought a small cottage by a quiet lake 2 hours outside the city. It had a wide porch, creaky floorboards, and a vegetable garden that needed some love. For the first time in decades, I had no meetings to attend. No employees depending on me. No contracts to negotiate. The air felt different. Lighter. Peaceful. Julie hadn't called in 6 weeks. The silence ached some days. But it also brought clarity. I had spent so many years measuring my worth by her approval, her calls, her needs. Now, I was learning to measure it by something else. My own peace of mind. I used part of the sale to create an education trust for my 2 grandchildren. When they turn 18, they'll get the funds directly, no access for Julie or Rick. It was my way of saying, I still believe in your future. I also quietly paid off their mortgage, not as a gift, but as a final act of closure. No more payments, no more expectations. It was the last check I would ever write for them. The rest? It was mine. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty about that. 6 months later, a letter arrived. Not a text. Not an email. An actual handwritten letter, addressed in careful, unfamiliar script. The return address was Julie's, Part HE5. I hesitated before opening it. Inside, the words were slow, deliberate, like she had rewritten them a dozen times. Dear Mom, it began. I've been trying to write this for months. I didn't know what to say. At first, I wanted to ask you to fix everything, to go back to how things were. But now I understand. How things were wasn't healthy, not for either of us. She went on to say that she and Rick were divorcing, that his business had filed for bankruptcy, that she'd taken a job as a teacher's aide at the local elementary school. It's been the hardest year of my life, she wrote, but maybe also the most honest. She didn't ask for money. She didn't ask for help. She wrote, I'm sorry for taking you for granted, for only calling when I needed something, for treating you like a bank instead of a mother. You weren't punishing me when you sold the company. You were setting us both free. At the bottom, she added, P.S. I kept the plastic flower. It's on my kitchen windowsill. And every time I see it, I remember the moment I realized I broke your heart. I sat on my porch for a long time after reading that letter, watching the light change across the lake. I didn't cry. Not because it didn't hurt, but because something in me had already healed. I wrote Julie a letter back. I thanked her. I told her that her words meant more to me than she could know. But I didn't mail it. Not right away. Some wounds need time to close before you touch them again. Some relationships need space to regrow. This time from truth, not obligation. Maybe someday, we'll find our way back to each other. But for now, I'm content. Content to live without guilt. Content to wake up without waiting for the phone to ring. Content to walk down to the dock in the morning and hear the loons call across the water. I spent decades being responsible for other people's lives. Now, I'm finally living my own. And it is enough. To you watching this, have you ever been taken for granted by someone you love? Have you ever had to choose peace over pleasing others? Tell me in the comments. I read everyone. And if this story meant something to you, please like, share, and subscribe. You never know who might need to hear it. Thank you for spending your time with me.